Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to Using AI Moderation for UX Research. I'm Ben. I work at User Interviews on the content and community team. Again, we have two wonderful guests who are going to be doing much more talking than me. So let's get to some of our content today. We have two things that we want to do. First, we want to talk a bit about what AI moderation is. How does it work typically? What are its benefits? How might you use it for particular research use cases? We want to set the table so that you know a bit about what we're talking about. And then in part two, we've got a great case study walkthrough featuring the team from Intuit. We have Joanne here who will be introducing herself in a second to walk through how she used Outset to really leverage AI moderation as a method to answer an immediate question while allowing space for discovery and sort of iterative bringing in of stakeholders. I think it'll be a really illuminating webinar, both if you ever used AI for your research or if you're somebody who is like, how does AI work for research? A bit of housekeeping before I introduce our guests. Yes, we are recording this, not just me. We are recording this and you will get the slides. So if you need to jump for any reason, don't worry. We will have the slides to you at the latest early next week, but probably sooner. So yes, recording. Yes, you'll get the slides. We would really like it if you used the Q&A box for your questions. It helps us keep everything centralized, and it also lets you upvote questions that you want us to address first. You can answer or ask questions anonymously if you'd rather do so. So please pop open that question and answer box and direct all of your questions there. But also use the chat if you have any resources that you have found useful. If you have feedback about using AI moderation, we want you to feel like you can share, and we want to give you space to do so. So pop open the chat for discussion and use the Q&A for the Q&A. And finally, depending on where you're looking at this, in the upper right or on the bottom, you'll see a box that reads resources. We've thrown some reports, case studies, podcasts about using AI for user research, including a recent report that we published using AI moderation. So if you're interested in learning and seeing other examples of how powerful this method can be for research, please pop open that resources box and check those out. Okay, enough. Well, a little bit more from me. We have two amazing guests. I've had an opportunity to work with both of them. They have mostly put up with me and my hijinks. I really, really think you're going to learn a lot from them. First, we have Aaron Cannon. He is the CEO and co-founder of Outset. It is the first AI moderation platform ever created and used by companies like Weight Watchers, Nestle, and Intuit, as we'll hear from today. Before that, Aaron was a VP of product and design at tech companies, and he cut his teeth as a research and strategy consultant. I think it's really useful to have Aaron on because he both works on and thinks about AI moderation as a method and platform and tool, and has a background in product and research. And so he's been there. He's had tight timelines, low budget, little to no headcount, while also being asked to run, informing strategy with research. And then we also have Joanne McGorty. And Joanne is a senior manager of research at Intuit, where she's been executing research for the past 5 years. It's a busy time at the Intuit tax world. She is spearheading the research behind cutting-edge Gen AI initiatives that power user-centric innovations for small and medium-sized businesses. She has a PhD in neuropsychology from Brigham Young, big win last night against KU, and an MS in human factors from San Jose State, go Spartans. Joanne has nearly 2 decades leading cross-functional research and product strategy teams. So Aaron will be giving us our 10,000-foot, what he's hearing from other founders, product leaders, designers, researchers like yourself, operations folks, and Joanne is living it. She is not only using AI to build and help her own customers, but she's using it with her team. So welcome to Aaron and Joanne. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Okay, let's get to part one. And before I throw things over to our guests, I actually want to launch a poll. So you'll see that pop up on your screen. The question is, how are you currently using AI for fieldwork? Now, fieldwork, I'm restricting to, again, the actual collection of data. Are you using it to manage participants? Are you using AI to send messages and do email outreach? Are you using it to, Figma has some interesting AI plugins where it can create composites. Are you running your usability tests? Are you moderating interviews with AI? Tell us how it is that you are using AI at all, or if you are not using it, please select that. I think it'll be useful for our guests to get a baseline as to how and whether folks are using AI for their fieldwork. I'll give folks another 10 seconds. It looks like right now, and I'll share this poll in a second, it looks like I am not using AI for fieldwork. is an elite, which is great. Hopefully that's why you're here, to learn about how it can be powerful and useful. We've got some folks who are saying that they use it for moderation, some folks for unmoderated. Let me end that poll and share now. So there we have those results. So really excited that you're here. Again, hopefully you'll get something that maybe you can share with your decision makers or your stakeholders or whoever controls, what sorts of tools and the budget for them that you can use for research. I think, again, you'll see through Joanne and Aaron's great stories about this case study and the method that it's useful and powerful. Okay, so Aaron, why don't we start with you? You're the one that created or co-founded Outset. Why do you think AI moderation is on the rise? I'm hearing a lot about it. I've used it myself, found it to be very powerful. As a founder, though, someone who was like, hey, let's create a whole platform dedicated to this. What were you seeing?
Yeah.
Why bet on it?
Yeah, good question. And so thanks again for having us. This is awesome. I love how many people are showing up for this and learning about all this. Ultimately, okay, so as a founder, like it all comes down to what problem are you solving, right? And I think one of the challenges that we've had in research for a long time is that we have this trade-off that we have to make. Whenever we have a big question, we've got to answer with research. You're either going to go, if you want to get depth and you want to go deep and you want to get the context and nuance, then we go with qualitative methods, which are awesome, right? I mean, they're critical. I've done probably much more research in that vein in my career, but ultimately they are manual. They can be really slow. They can be very time consuming. And even after all that, after a month of doing interviews, you can still end up with a pretty small sample size, and you go to your stakeholders and they may push back on that. Oh, you only talked to 25 people, and in your head, you're like, that was a lot of people. But the reality is that may not always be received in that way. And so, scale can really matter in different instances. And then on the flip side, we can run surveys, which can get you scale, can get you that speed where it can be delivered in less than a week, but you're not getting all that nuance and all the kind of what makes qualitative great. And so ultimately, like that problem, we've just kind of had to accept, right? There's a messiness of human conversation that we've just never been able to capture. But what we saw, and I think what others are seeing, is that AI can actually manage and exist in the messiness of human language to help extract and elicit all sorts of interesting things from people. And so ultimately, that was what we found, and that was our first, what we first aimed to solve. And so over the last couple of years, I think people are kind of seeing that this can help cover that gap, that trade-off that we have to make that has been always so painful, and it can cover it quite well. And then as we've all kind of been building out this industry, it's been much more sophisticated. It's kind of tackled all sorts of different use cases. So that's the
great.
underlying why. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I absolutely. And what I like about it is we've been asking researchers when they're sort of suspicious of AI, and it's when it's just sort of kludged onto a thing like we'll use AI for X. And so what I like about this, Aaron, is that you've thought about how it could really extend and benefit a particular pain point. Joanne, you are a Gen AI researcher. What for you was appealing about AI moderation as a method, as a tool, both for your own research and your teams?
Yeah, so when we first learned about Outset and AI moderation, one of the things I really was drawn to was this customizable interview scripts. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But traditionally, I've been using unmoderated platforms for decades, like over a decade. They had 3 features when I started using them, but traditionally they're very linear, right? You have to tell it, ask question 1, and then no matter what your participant says, ask question 2. And then no matter what they say, you can ask question 3. We didn't have rating scales at that time, but they're very linear. And so what initially drew me when I saw a demo of Outset was the ability to ask a question based on what the participant previously said. And we're going to show that a little bit later about how we program that and how that benefits us.
Yeah, I have some experience in working with unmoderated diary tools, and that was always the struggle at helping researchers. It's like, okay, we want them to share moments of pain and joy with our product experience, and we would have to pre-program the script. So it was like, is this a moment of joy or pain? What's happening? And to your point, Joanne, most of the time the questions would capture all of the context and the richness, but those times when it didn't, that's always what the researchers wanted to home in on and pull on. Like, okay, but what are we missing? What are we not seeing? Sure, maybe our product team has some analytics on these things, but we really want to tease out the things we're not learning. And so, yeah, as Joanne's going to walk through here in this case study, I love the ability to have, in some of the platforms, you can program your interview script and AI will suggest follow-up questions. And so you as a researcher have this co-designing buddy helping you think through. Certainly you come in with some sort of minimum questions you have to ask and things you want to tailor in on. But yeah, I love that iterative spirit. As we've got here, it does automatically transcribe. Most of the platforms analyze the data automatically. That third point is so I think, highlighted. Aaron, I'm wondering if you can talk about that query-based project interaction. What we mean by that is that at the end of a project, your data are not static. Joanne and her team, as we'll see, fleshed out some themes, made some recommendations based on those things. But a person you could share a link to this project, and your stakeholders could, not knowing anything about the project, just start asking questions of it. Aaron, how have you seen other companies find value in that sort of query-based engagement with the project data?
Yeah, I think one frustration I often hear is like the final report of a project is static in general. Like in traditional research, it's a static report. And what else is there? But the reality is that our reports shouldn't be static. They should be dynamic, right? Like we can't predict every question that a stakeholder in the future will ever ask us, right? Or we can't predict even what we're going to want to get out of this research before we do it. And so the idea of having a kind of strict definition of this is the only kind of report. So the way I think a lot of the kind of AI moderated research world is thinking about this is saying, hey, if we're going to help you scale up and get really in-depth, dynamic, conversations out of hundreds of people, we also have to help you scale down and get from the, call it, breadth of data into something that really tells you what you need to know. And so the query-based interaction is, we call it chat with your data in our product, which is basically the idea that you should be able to continuously ask questions against your data. And that you, at any point, a month later or the day, or halfway through fielding, either way, you should be able to ask real questions that guide the kind of analysis not to what we expected to get out of it, but rather what you want to know now. And so what we do is like we help bring up quotes or help kind of do some analysis, et cetera. And there's just like an awesome way to be able to interact with a living, breathing artifact.
Yeah, and if I may share, one of the reasons we wanted to start moving towards AI tools to help conduct our research is, I'm sure the hundreds of people on this call today and anyone viewing, they know that like in 2 weeks, in 3 months, people are going to say, oh, have you ever heard a customer say this, or has this ever happened? And I can't tell you how many times this was back in the day where you'd go through your Google, like the notes that you've taken on a spreadsheet, and you try to, where's that one word? And I'm going to make up the word smell. I know they said smell somewhere. Where is it? And now that my team, and I've seen them actually do this, they just type it in, right? They'll type it in and it'll pull where and who said it. And then you can click on that, see the transcript, you can see the clip, you can see the person talking about it and get the context. And so it helps us, that query-based kind of like asking questions helps us just move so much quicker and able to answer within a day to our stakeholders.
And I'll even add, I mean, one of the cool things about AI just in general is that it's not, we're used to things like keyword searches, right? The kind of a world of indexing. That's what Google kind of introduced to the world, and like very advanced indexing. But AI, and part of the reason large language models are such a threat to like Google's business and are so interesting is that they're semantic searches, not keyword searches. Semantic means what's the meaning behind it. So if you're working, if you're searching for when people talked about smells, but you don't just want the word smell to appear, of like all the quotes, but what about people talking about odors? Or what about people talking about sniffing? This is a weird analogy we've now taken too far, but like,
I like it.
But what's cool is that AI can actually has the whole like this, it's all math behind the scenes, and it's all these vector embeddings that have basically linked the notion of smell and odor and sniffing into a similar thing. And that's what semantic search can give you. So beyond even AI moderation, I think AI has ushered in a really interesting place of finding stuff.
Yeah. And to that, the last thing I would add is if you're someone out there who has, like I have, you do the research, into Joanne's point, you're on to maybe the next project, your plate is very full and you don't have time to sort of build that repository. I was at a conference last year and someone working at a great big enterprise tech company got some AI and machine learning resourcing and like built a research sort of buddy, so that kind of served as their repository, and they shared it with all of their stakeholders, and it was this wonderful use case. And at the end of the presentation, all the questions were like, right, but what if you don't have time or budget or resourcing? You can share project links, and it acts as a mini repository. You can package together the work you've done in a quarter or a month, and you can say, listen, we ran the concept tests, and then we iterated on some of your designs. Whatever you want to know, like, here's our primary shareable, check it out. Like, you can then ask your stakeholders to frame the questions in their own language. So maybe they're all about the owner of the concept, for example. But a lot of times we as researchers, we only have enough time to ask certain questions, deliver based on a recommendation, and then we're on the move. So if you're someone who's like, gosh, I wish I had time to, or the budget for a repository, I'm not saying it'll solve all your problems, but this query-based interaction really puts the stakeholder in the driver's seat to engage with the research in a really engaging way. So let's now move from what it is to how and when it's really useful. We've heard a little bit about well, we'll go into some of the specific use cases, but Joanne, I'm wondering if you can talk high level. When you're hearing a question from a stakeholder or a research opportunity, when do you think, oh, this is a really good fit for an AI moderation method?
To be quite honest, we try to default to AI moderation because of the speed that we travel in our group. We have a week to do a study, less than a week. Usually it's about 3 days, because a decision has to be made, and a decision will be made. I love it for exploration. We've used this a lot, where we know there's something there, but we don't quite understand from the customer's perspective. How does that look? How does that feel? Where is it embedded in their context? And so I see concept exploration. We will ask, share how you do this. How does it? And we love that, because then you can ask a few, read them, change your questions, ask a few more, and iterate really quick and keep asking, and we'll go into that. We've also done shared videos. Hey, what do you think about this concept? Here's a video, here's a UI. Done usability studies. The quant size, yes, we've done things where we want to quantify things like documents. What types of documents? How are these being stored? And kind of get a quick read. But I really love it for iterating on research questions, because you don't always know what the answer is going to be. And we'll talk about that in a little later in our case study.
Yeah, Aaron, what would you add? How are you finding companies and founders and other teams finding value for the method?
Yeah, I mean, there's in a way, the qualitative kind of data gathering is not a single method or a single kind of research, but rather a primitive that we use across many things, right? We do qualitative when you're trying to do concept testing and usability, and you're also doing it for discovery. So in that way, I certainly think about AI moderation playing a role across many of these. I also think there's like there are times where you may not want to use AI moderated. Like, I'll be the first to admit, if you don't have any structure around your guide, and you just want to improvise and just explore with a user and just build that understanding, go do that. Or another version I hear sometimes is like, if you're a founder and you're trying to do discovery to figure out what you want to go build and who you want to build for, it's like, that might be your future customer, right? Build the relationship, right? So there are many cases. I mean, this is not, there's lots of ways that we use qualitative research in a one-on-one setting. It's all about you and how you're, materializing kind of ideas. But once you have some structure on what you want to learn, even just a guide, just a simple enough guide that AI can use to explore, it is an awesome way to get the speed and scale, as Joanne said.
Yeah, and we've got some questions in the chat about the jobs framework. I think it's just what Aaron was saying there. If you have a question like you're using the what job does our product serve, or when you're hiring for this kind of job, what do you use? Those two questions, I mean, you can think about just how many different versions you're going to get. And so if you're someone who might typically run a focus group, or maybe do a survey, but you'd like a little bit of depth, this lets you have both. It lets you get nice, diverse, contextual answers. And if your product or engineering team is like, right, but you only talked to 15 people, well, I mean, as we'll hear from Joanne, you can get several hundred responses very quickly. So I am often in a position wherein I'm inclined to do something quantitative because I like the size and the rigor and being able to say, like, here's the big splashy sample size. But I love the depth and the richness, as many mixed methods researchers do, of being able to get into that context, do a little bit of digging, and really let the participants share what's valuable to them. So it, to Aaron's point, doesn't work exactly all the time. But if you've got that thing that you want to tease out and get more of, you know, it's like doing a micro interview if you've only got a couple of questions, and it really scales up, which again, for the quantoid and me, it gives me rigor. And Joanne, when we were doing our practice session, you mentioned reliability and validity. What do you mean there, that it helps you feel more confident in the results and that you're getting accurate results? Could you talk about reliability and validity in AI moderation for a second?
Yeah, sure. And I think it does boil down to being able to iterate. Oftentimes we will have a new learning, right? And we may do it via unmoderated, moderated. We may have some casual conversations with customers. 99% of the time, I'm pushing my team to validate, to replicate that, to see if that finding holds at scale. And that's about 99% of the time. And so this allows us to say, hey, we've heard this. What other flavors of this could exist? And how big is this? And how, I often like to end with that quant to say, I feel confident that this is a finding, because at the end of the day, our organization is investing lots of money, lots of dollars into developing features and building our platform. So I want to give them that confidence. And that's why I brought up reliability and validity, is because I can confidently say, we found this, and it's through iterative, multiple testing, qual, quant, and you name it. And we do rely on your tools for this.
That's great. I love that. And I think it's so important to remind our audience and ourselves as a research community that is, we're trying to empower our stakeholders to make more rigorous decisions. We're trying to imbue them with confidence. We want to feel confident in our recommendations, but when we have that share out, sometimes sample size is really what they want, especially if you're working with a more tech-centric development or architectural sort of audience or stakeholder group. Here are some considerations. Aaron, you've helped a lot of different teams and companies build and think about AI moderation. Do you want to home in on any of these or mention something else when someone's thinking about starting an AI moderated project or practice? What else would you add to, or what would you highlight here?
No, these are a great list. I think on the first one, there's this question of vendor process and data security, and all these questions are going to come up. And it's something, we certainly spend a lot of our time working with legal and procurement and security teams. But luckily, this is actually an easier to adopt kind of AI tool than something that might sit within the database of the company or something like that, right? This is about gathering net new data. So it kind of doesn't have the risk levels to some, but there's always, every big company, everybody who works at them knows that can take time. But I think these are great. And just on the last note, I just wanted to point on, because I sometimes get this question of how do participants kind of receive this idea of having AI lead a conversation, right? And what's interesting, early on, we did a lot of research on this because we wanted to know the answer to that. How do participants experience this from the other side? And what was interesting is they did not say, hey, why is AI interviewing me and not a person? Instead, they said, hey, I can complete this anytime. It's asynchronous. I can do it right now. I can do it while I'm washing the dishes, whatever. But it's actually a more engaging survey that listens to me. So it's actually, the frame of reference is a survey that's actually making better use of my time, not an interview that's somehow not. And so I think that's, it's always critical to provide expectations. This is AI. This is a conversational survey. This is making it clear that that's the technology. In our platform, we always make it clear. We never want to hide anything. But it is actually received quite this is way more fun than a survey. It's like listening to me. It plays it back. It's obviously with me. So I think that's an interesting reframing that I've gotten from the research we've done with participants.
Joanne, what would you add in terms of when you just first started using AI moderation, or now that you've got some projects under your belt? What are some best practices, considerations, things that you think someone new to this method should keep in mind?
Yeah, I do think at first it's a little different, right? To type in your questions, and there's a feature in Outset that allows you to, and Aaron, you'll know the more technical term. It allows you you can tell the AI, hey, dig deeper, keep going. We want deep probing, or do a little bit of probing, right? Like just a little bit. I think playing with those kind of that functionality where it can probe on its own. For example, we did a study once about, and we asked people how to use QuickBooks, and then the AI would be, oh, that's interesting. You've been using QuickBooks for a long time. Tell us more about that. And the AI would, that's the AI coming up with its own questions. And so you can program how the depth of probing it will do. So that's one thing that I've noticed. And the other one, again, we'll cover it, is around that branching questions. If then is really cool, especially if you ask a rating scale question. We're going to see it here where you said if they selected other, ask this. So those two things is kind of that flexibility. I would say getting used to that took me a little while. Had to run a couple studies. And then the last thing I'll say is really pushing the boundaries on what you can ask and how. For example, we wanted to learn more about how what's new in mobile, because I think mobile's changing, right? There's a lot of things that are changing, and a lot of people would be like, "Oh, let's do a 3-week diary study." And no, I was just like, "Tell me what you do in the morning. Tell me what you do in the evening on mobile." Those kind of things. So really pushing the boundaries. I've seen us have great success there.
Yeah, and to that I would add, as someone who's programmed just a few and run just a few AI moderated studies, that allowing a little bit of that space for discovery and the novelty, Joanne, it's great. You want to, we go into interviews typically with, like, I mean, even if you have a structured interview or a semi-structured interview, you really have stuff you want to cover, and so sometimes you just have to kind of let go and let the participant and the AI sort of figure out what's an interesting point of discovery that you didn't maybe think about that could be really interesting for your stakeholders, and so. That's why I've got add buffer time. There's also, as we'll see, it's a different approach to analysis, wherein you get a sort of a top line readout of the themes, and so you've got a time saving there, but then you're gut checking on like what quote works, and so there's just a different use of time that's really interesting. And to Joanne's point, she's already mentioned iterative research a few times. That for me is another big underline. Is don't worry that I mean, certainly you'll know your budget better than I will, but you don't have to be as precious with research. Yes, it's important to respect and value customers' time and your participants' time. And as Joanne said, if you see something in study one, launch study two. If you've got the budget and the time and the bandwidth to dig into what you're finding, do it. And so I'm actually working on an AI moderation guide. Hopefully I'll have that done soon and I can share with folks. And that for me is a big benefit. And then the last thing I'll say, I promise folks, I have a background in communication research, and I've been finding that there's a lot of research on how comfortable participants feel talking to an AI about sensitive subjects specifically. So if you're someone who works in maybe health and wellness, financial security, I have a friend who works in estate planning, which has to do with the death of parents and family and loved ones. I'm a pretty affable person, but those are tough subjects to talk about, the end of one's life or the planning for the care of another loved one. When it's an AI, removing the human from it can often make participants feel more comfortable to disclose. And it's not a bait and switch. As Aaron said, these folks know that it's an AI chatbot, but there's just the Hawthorne effect, right? We change and alter our behavior when we know we're in a study. That's reduced slightly. It's not eliminated completely, but to all of these great considerations and benefits, I would just add that can sometimes, you'll find that folks feel more comfortable sharing. I don't know, Aaron or Joanne, if you found maybe that you get more depth or different kinds of disclosure.
Yeah, can I mention something else?
Please.
You brought that up. There are times, and there are, I would say many times, in which I don't want to be in front of a customer because I don't want to have that. I call it the halo effect. I think I'm making it up, but I must have read it somewhere where they like me because we're connecting. I'm a psychologist, so I do like the whole connection thing with people. And there are times where I just want to hear the truth. I want to hear if you like it or not. And so I don't want that human to human element in there because I want a pure rating of it. And we have done that a number of times in which we actively decide we don't want to bias their responses because oh, this is, I'm interviewing with QuickBooks and I use QuickBooks all the time. There's that element of bias there that we might want to eliminate. So that was a really interesting comment to me.
Yeah, and you're right. It is the halo effect. We tend to find and ascribe more positive features to those we find either physically or socially attractive. And yeah, we as interviews, we want to make folks feel comfortable, but there's this good participant effect wherein the participant wants to help us out and give us a good rating. And so, Joanne, yeah, sometimes we want that tough feedback. In fact, most times we want that tough feedback from a customer or a participant. Okay, we've talked about a lot of things. I'm going to take a coach's time out here and see if there are any questions that are really climbing up the charts. Aaron, I don't know, I think you've been maybe looking at the chat. Has anything stood out to you that you want to respond to about AI moderation in particular? We've got questions about maybe data privacy and security. We've got some questions about demographics. I think we can dig into that in a second, but anything that you're seeing, Aaron, that you might want to tackle? We've got, job security. This is a good question. Here we go, Joanne. So now that you've been using, I mean, it's a good question. So Estelle asks a really good question about, or pardon me, it's an anonymous question, smart question. You know, if you're doing a lot of AI moderation, what then is the role and value of a user researcher? Aaron, why don't I kick it over to you? How have you, for teams that are really adopting this quickly, how are they managing their expertise and credibility with the AI moderation tool?
Yeah, it's a good question. It comes up certainly a lot. I think, like, I think the same argument was made back when user testing came out and was doing usability, unmoderated usability. I think there is a natural inclination to say, okay, if a tool can now do a particular task in a way that gives us some advantage, but I used to do that task, what does that mean for me? And I don't think this is like some massive upending and replacing of jobs. I think you look in other categories like customer support, I think there's a lot more, okay, this is like, kind of one for one. That's not what we see. We see this is a tool for your toolkit. So it's like, okay, as a researcher, you can now deploy this strategically to gather more data to make you more of the expert, to move faster and deliver better things for you. You can still use that time that you've now saved because you didn't have to do the last 15 of those interviews or 50, right? Like you can now use that time to do 3 that really matter, and you can go deep and spend 2 hours on each of them, right? So ultimately, it is a freeing because of what the software can do, as opposed to a constraining. Now, at a high level, do I think that these jobs will evolve over time? I do. Right? I do think that this pushes research into maybe slightly less executional and maybe slightly more strategic, right? To be the kind of the conductor of the orchestra and not just the violinist, right? Like to actually pull together a bunch of different kinds of data to tell the story that's going to move the needle forward. But I think if you ask any research leader over the long run, what's the most powerful kind of influence and impact researchers have, it's affecting the business. It's not that they were able to do the 30 interviews in 2 weeks. And so I think there's gonna be a shift, but that shift will take a long time. And ultimately, I think this puts, if anything, researchers in a more central position. So anyway, that's my quick my quick take.
Joanne?
Yeah, I love this question. So out of the risk of being too transparent and revealing too much, one of my KPIs and success metrics is that our team has had 20 times in the course of a year impacted a product decision at a large scale. Okay, and I put 20, just you can make it 15, whatever you want, right? But we need to have traceable impact where we literally can say this decision was made because of research. I think, and so I'll say that. And then early on in AI, a couple of years ago, we started researching how AI is going to augment jobs. And I think that's going to happen with research as well, in that we are now going to be taking our findings and impacting the business decisions. And that's going to be, I think, really, really important for us as a research community to say, how is what someone is saying, what they're doing, what they're rating, what they're clicking, how does that impact a business decision? And so our team has to have that decision. Like we have to trace it on almost every study that we do of what decision is being impacted. And that's going to become our like really crucial role where I think we will be valuable to the orgs. I don't know if that made sense.
Absolutely. And some data to support what you're saying. If you click that resources tab, our AI and UX research report, that was the big finding when we asked participants, researchers, what's the trade-off? And they said, AI can help me do really fast analysis, But then when I ask it to thematize, it can get me like 60% of the way there or 50% of the way there. And then that last little bit, I use my knowledge of my stakeholders, what kind of reports they like to read, the timing, when do we need to make the decision, and the inside knowledge that I have about our product, our context, our market. And so, Joanne, I think you're exactly it. AI is not going to be doing everything for you. It might get you faster themes. It might get you to saturation for a code quicker. And then it's still up to you to make sense of that for your decision maker. I mean, you can share a really nice, robust deliverable. The stakeholder wants to know, so what? What do I do with these data?
Right.
That is the role of the researcher.
Right. And as researchers, we're going to have to get more technical and understand, at least on our team, we've been pushing to understand AI models more. How does it calculate? What's the regression like? What's the weighting factor? And having impact at that level, we utilize our customers and these tools to help get to that level of insight and impact. But we can do it so much quicker. Now we have time to sit and think, how is an AI model impacted by this? That's our neck of the woods is AI modeling. And so we're able to say, take the business needs plus the customer and really join that in a quicker way. It's not being eradicated. We're not being eradicated, at least.
I love that. And I know, Aaron, you want to chime in here, but I want to make sure we get to this case study because we're talking theoretical and I want to drive into this AI moderation case study. So now we're gonna turn things over to Joanne and Aaron to talk us through how AI moderation was used for a specific question that then led Joanne to unlock some other questions in this great example of iterative and discovery. So Joanne, why don't you take us through first the opportunity? What question or what product decision did you and your team need to make with this? And you're muted, I'm sorry to say. You're being a good guest.
That is not the first time that's happened. Okay, so I work on Intuit Assist. We recently released a number of features. We've had so many commercials on the Super Bowl ads and everywhere. My husband's actually getting tired of it. He's like, there's your company again. There's your tools again. And so there's a lot of opportunities when AI has come out, and we've studied this extensively for years. That's how I was brought onto this team. Is AI there to augment? Is it there to automate tasks? What's the place? Where does AI fit in our world? And we landed on automating tasks, so work done for you. And that was really the area we wanted to explore. Is what does that mean? Why do you want work done for you? We know it's to get other things done, right? We know it's so you can attend to. Our customers are small businesses. They can do what they're passionate about, right? They can really focus on that. But really, what else is there? Is that the end of it? Is that what AI is just there for? And I didn't believe that's what AI is going to do. It's just work done for you. It's got to be more to it. So I wanted to peel back the layers, if you will, in our onion analogy, like just go down to the core of it. And so like I said, I focus on the QuickBooks ecosystem. And so we have a lot of features that kind of are embedded in there. And that's kind of the opportunity here that we're going to speak about.
Awesome. And so then, Aaron, maybe you can kick this off and then Joanne can add to it. How would a question like that fit into something like Outset or a method like AI moderation? What typically does a customer or a researcher bring to you typically when they want to kick off a study?
Yeah, so basically the key input, and there's usually a big question of like, what are the inputs from researchers? Because ultimately you don't want AI making stuff up, and you also don't want it to like go in any weird direction. Like the point is that you control it. And so ultimately the way we designed our product, and I think others as well, is that you want to basically be putting in a moderator guide. That's a concept, a framework we're all used to, a moderator guide. And there's obviously nuances to this, right? Talking to giving instructions to AI is a little bit different than giving instructions to a person, but ultimately it is a set of questions that you want to cover, right? And then you have a set of instructions, go deep here, go less deep there, show this image here, share your video there, and basically capture all of that in the programming. And that's ultimately, there's more to it than that, but it's like in the simplest terms, it's a moderator guide.
Great. And so Joanne, high level, what was you had this question where you wanted to understand more about the work done for you. How did that translate into this moderator guide that we're seeing a clip of on the screen?
Right. So what I did was I shared a video clip with participants, and the video clip was literally like 20 seconds. But the reason being is I wanted to set them in a context of what an AI tool can do for them. And so I know we're talking about AI. This is kind of meta.
Very Inception, very meta. Yes.
I am on the AI team for QuickBooks or Assist, we're called. And so one of our goals all along as we're building these AI tools for QuickBooks is helping efficiency, right? But like I said, there's got to be more to it. There's got to be some. So I literally just explored. I started exploring what can AI do for you, like what, and I wanted to frame it in this feature so they understand. Because if you leave it too broad, right, and I'm sure every researcher has found this, a participant's going to answer, especially in an unmoderated, they're going to answer broad, right? AI can help me work better. But I really wanted to put it into what can QuickBooks, how can that help you? And so that's where I set out to just start asking, right? Start asking using Outset. Yeah.
That's great. And I know here we're looking at screen on the guide. And so Aaron, we're looking at different sorts of kinds of questions you can program. You can program certainly open ends. There are follow-ups here. Joanne mentioned video. What else can a person program in one of these AI moderated surveys or conversations?
Yeah, so there's a couple dimensions. There's one is what's the input modality. So do you want voice? Do you want video? Do you want text? Do you want screen sharing, right? You can kind of cover all of the different inputs from the participant. You can even set the, call it the outputs from AI. Do you want that to be voice, that to be text, all those things? And then, within a guide, once you've set that up, there's a matter of what kind of question. Do you want some multiple choice in rating questions? And then what are all the conversational, all the kind of real qualitative components that you want to cover? How much do you want it to probe? You can even see in this screenshot, there's this thing between brackets, which is more of like Joanne was talking about earlier, where you said like, I want it to be dynamic of who gets what question and why they're getting it, et cetera. And in this case, you can see between those brackets, we're telling AI here, only ask the following question if the respondent selects other. Other was a previous answer. And so every time at every point in the conversation, AI has all the context of the previous back and forth, all the context of the interview so far, and can then engage in your next guide question accordingly. So that's most of the inputs. You could also see at the bottom there that they've added some stimulus. So you want to show an image, for example, or a video, as Joanne talked about.
Yep.
That's great.
That's why I turned to Outset, was because I knew I could be flexible. So if they said other, I'm going to use some other reason. There's another reason why I wanted to probe a little deeper, because this was exploratory. This was like, well, tell me what that other is. And so that's why I turned to Outset, because I had that capability in this like foundational kind of exploratory research.
And to just underline something that Joanne and Aaron said earlier about one of the benefits, I mean, you can get several dozen or 100 people who selected other, and you can drill into what it is that's happening. If you were only to do this traditionally, you might have only enough time to do 15, 20 interviews. If only 2 people selected or mentioned other, would you as a researcher feel confident saying, okay, we actually have a thing here that we ought to drill more deeply in? With something like AI moderation through Outset here, you can get a lot more scale to feel comfortable assessing whether or not it's like a distractor, something that only a few people mention, or if there's enough there that, I really want to dig into that and see what's going on. Okay, so the field work, we've been alluding to it. It's quick. Joanne, walk us through how fast it took and what you and your team are doing when the conversations and the data are coming back.
Yeah, I want to highlight that I conducted 3 studies in all to come to this finding that we're going to share with you. Each study took less than a day to fill, to like get to. I just want to tell you, it was less than a day to fill. In all, we had 36 or so participants. And so we were moving fast, but just to emphasize that, like 1 day to get this data, right? So again, I talked about efficiency, right? We know that AI will help us do things more efficiently. I mean, that's the whole premise of this call right here, right? One thing that I would have never known is when we asked in our open-ended kind of exploration, is that our businesses were looking to help reduce error. And it's this, and literally from one of the transcripts, this fat finger phenomenon. And I had never, it wouldn't have crossed my mind of errors. So imagine you're going to send an invoice to a customer and you type 1,000 and it should have been 10,000, right? How much is that? That's a huge error. And that's what these folks are talking about. So I heard this a little bit, right? I'm hearing a little bit. And the reason why I wanted to conduct multiple studies was, do we hear this again? Right? That gets to that validating kind of thing I was talking about earlier. But as you can see here, when we asked these open-ended questions, they were like, well, I guess it could also help me reduce error. And that's what I have there highlighted.
And so, Joanne, you're seeing that this thing about error inputs. Did you and your team then immediately launch another study? Did you
Yes.
earmark it for later? You know, like take us into you and your team's mind. You're in the middle of field work. You find a thing that you didn't expect. You think it could be important for what you're working on.
Oh, yes. So in my mind, remember I told you we want to impact decisions, right? I didn't tell anyone. I kept it from our stakeholders because it's one day. It was literally one day. So, overnight, I'm literally programming maybe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's common for our team to be programming these studies, and we're able to get the data the next day. I wanted to quantify this to see, is there a there there? At Intuit, we always say, is there a there there? Is there something here? And so in my mind, before I even shared, I ran another one of these, but I wanted to quantify it, which I believe is on the next slide on how I did that.
Great. Yeah. And we'll get to that in a second. I just want to add another example. I ran a study with actually Nick, who's on the call. We were asking product managers to talk about times that they've interacted with and collaborated with researchers. And we had several hundred interviews with product managers in a matter of a week and a half. So again, I was able to, as a full-time content and community manager, be working on other things like wonderful webinars with my colleagues and friends while I have research going. An old boss of mine used to say that one of the great benefits of sort of unmoderated technology for research is like a set it and forget it report. You don't really want to forget about your research, but it's a set it and like revisit it. You know, you as a researcher have to be very engaged with your fieldwork. Understandably so. You want to make sure that they've scheduled time that you can meet, that you have availability to prep. Most of that is taken care of. And so you can be focusing on, as Joanne explained here, what's coming in, how does it relate to what I need to share, that decision, and what do I do about it? And so it's great. So, okay, Joanne, what are we looking at here?
All right. So like I said, I wanted to kind of get a little bit, repetition here, because repetition in my world is good. I like seeing that. That makes me comfortable, right? And so I threw this up again, but this time I wanted to have it in a quantitative, if you will. And these are small numbers. But the reason why is because this was a door opening to a whole other area that we're going to research. So I just needed to validate, is it worth us spending time on this errors? And lo and behold, when I quantified it, it held true. So yes, saves time, efficiency is paramount, but lo and behold, there's this added value of reducing errors, which I would have never thought of on my own. And this is why we do research, right? So here you can see one of the, this is the output. I didn't have to create this chart. I didn't have to spend any time. I literally clicked analyze, the whole transcript. Erin knows what I'm talking about. And it like spits this out for me, for lack of a better word. And I was able to be like, boom, this is there. And that's how quick I was able to get to the answer of, is this error, AI can help me reduce errors, a thing? And in my mind, this was enough, at least for us, to go do more research and really understand errors and so forth. So that's why I wanted to share this this chart with y'all.
That's great. So you went in with certainly a discovery-based question. You thought you had a sense of what you might find based on some maybe conversation with product folks or other customers, and you found something that seemed small, but there's enough signal here where you and your team were like, okay, we're going to dig into it even more.
Yes, and I'll mention, in my mind, I always try to measure things relative to one another. And so when I see that 8 to 5, that was enough. I stopped the study at that point because I could see relative to the other things, this was big enough, right? So it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to quantify for generalizing the findings to the general population. It was more of like, yeah, is this big enough for us to go deeper? And in all, we're on like day 2. Right? We're on day 2, just to remind folks.
Love it. Erin, there's a bunch of questions that we're getting both in the chat and the Q&A about how data are handled by AI moderation tools. Can you talk about how Outset makes sure that AI isn't responding to AI questions, when a team like Joanne's goes in to analyze the data? Can they pick which kind of data are analyzed? Walk us through high level. What happens when Outset is analyzing the data from these conversations?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good question. I've seen questions about data both from the moderation side and the analysis side, and I think I'll maybe quickly touch on both if that's all right. So,
please,
on the moderating side, I think there's questions about accuracy and how do you make sure that the LLMs are staying on track and things like that. Hallucinations. And the beautiful thing about this use case is that you're not asking the LLMs to give a precise, behave in a precise way, but to rather follow the guide, stick to it, and dig deeper, which is actually very good at. So we don't have the hallucination problem of, let's just say, a chat GPT that we saw, a year ago or 2 years ago, where it wants to give you a precise answer, it doesn't know it, so it makes one up. Right. So actually and the other technique that a lot of AI founders would tell you about is the more you constrain AI, the less variability you see. So in other words, if you tell AI, to just say the word smell over and over again, it's not going to mess that up. It's not very useful, but it's not going to mess that up, right? If you say, hey, your chat GPT, you can literally do anything, well, now we have more variability. So we really orient towards constraining it. So we constrain it to the guide. That's why you don't have an option to just say, hey, just AI, go figure out what the journey is, right? It's actually about your guide, because researchers are, in fact, really the experts here in what they want to cover and why they want to cover it and how deep to go. And so AI is constrained to those instructions. So in other words, that's how we deal with that kind of the question about data up front. I think the question about the data on the back has some of the same ways that we kind of handle it. So constraining it, meaning in this case, it's about answering just a very narrow question, right? How might this feature help your business? And then it's either generating categories or it's using your categories and tagging them. And it's just it's like, if you imagined giving ChatGPT a quote from a user and hey, does this better fit into category A or category B? It's pretty good. I mean, that's kind of the way we all use ChatGPT a lot. That is actually quite high performance. And it's also subjective, so you don't always agree with it. That's okay. No two people kind of perfectly code the same. And we give you a bunch of tools so that you can adjust it or change it. And so our perspective is, let's make high performance as possible, constrain it so it's not, off giving you something that's unrelated, and then give you tools to edit and manipulate it. So I don't know if that fully covers it. So keep me honest here, but that's general.
Yeah. Joanne, what would you add? Does your team have a process or an approach when looking at the data and trying to make sense of it?
Yeah, I did want to cover that. And I have a slide here in which I was sharing the way we analyze. So let's sit on this one for a second. When we look at analysis, that, to be quite honest, that was the biggest hurdle for me as managing a team, and for me to get through when we talk about AI. But the flexibility of the analysis is really cool. So I look at it like it's going to go in and code some themes for me, and we require thematic analysis, right? So that's just our bread and butter is thematic analysis. What it does is it kind of gets me there faster. But the really cool thing about this is all of this is editable by you, the decision maker, the researcher. I can go into all of these, the themes, and I can adjust them. I can say fit into one bucket of theme. Only every quote or whatever has to be in one theme only, or I can put it in multiple themes. I can tell the AI to do that. So I'm instructing the AI on how and where and what themes to do, and it's just doing it for me, right? But what I love about this is it takes a leap of faith, but you got to do it. Go practice with it. I am managing this, right? So I'm guiding. And the cool thing is I use this screenshot because it's pretty benign. It's not going to harm us in any way. What business, what's your business like? And Outset will go and categorize them for me. So I can just disagree or agree with Outset at that point. That's my point of decision. As a neuropsychologist, right, I'm thinking, let's get there quicker, reduce my cognitive load. And so I literally will read it. Oh, I agree. Construction. Yep. This gentleman's in construction. Agree. And the next one, oh no, I'm going to be a little bit more detailed. So you can see there, it says manually edit tags. And I will go in and edit a few tags here and there. But the gist of it is that it started it for me, right? And all I got to do is manage that process now. And then I get this chart. And I literally, yeah.
And for me, when I've used AI moderation, there are again a lot of questions about sort of making sure that AI isn't interviewing other AI. I'm a part-time teacher. I know when I've read an AI generated essay, it reads in a particular way, and so as a researcher, you would probably have that same sort of sense. And so you can see here on the right, you can go into each and every one of these transcripts. Part of any sort of basic data cleaning pre-analysis phase, you're going to want to look at the data, look at each individual interview, and you can exclude particular interviews or keep things from the analysis. So it's it's not a toggle. It's not an on, analyze everything, or an off, analyze nothing. As Joanne is saying, you have some control to go in there, be unique, filter, tag, create, curate the data, and it's you ultimately are the one in charge of making sense of it and then sharing. So, Aaron, would you add anything to some of the controls that researchers have on the back end, or in terms of exports? Like, what else can they do with the data to make sure it gets them the decisions that they need to inform?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to add from what Joanne said. The only thing I'll mention is like sometimes I think people worry about, well, AI has gathered this data by conducting these conversations, worried about what does that mean about the data? And ultimately, like we try very hard in our product, every tag or theme or whatever is connected to a direct quote, a direct video clip, a direct raw data. So ultimately, at very least, you have the raw data is all there and it's all very real and it's all real people and it's all kind of substantive. And everything on top of that is controls for researchers to extract quicker, to find the right quotes, to organize better, to show some kind of thematic categories, things like that. And so it's always like we always build up from the raw data, right? AI is not telling you what to go do with your business, right? AI is saying, here's what we're hearing and here's some examples, right? And that's really like, I think the right way to orient right now with AI around doing research.
Great. With the time we have, Joanne, why don't you talk us through or explain some of the outcomes and impact that the study had?
Yeah. So again, 1 week I conducted 3 studies, over 30 interviews that we've completed. I had the flexibility and the moderating guide. Like you can see that where I said, ask this if they said this. I did that multiple times. AI, I looked at it as a personal assistant, right? So it got me to themes quicker, and then I could just adjust those themes. But also, it helped me identify things that maybe I wasn't thinking of. Like, oh, I didn't think of this type of category, if you will. I didn't even think about that. That's pretty cool. And yeah, and so that's kind of to sum it up of why I wanted to present this study was I think it helped shed light on all the things you can do in the flexibility.
And I want to end, with this tool now that you've used it on, or this approach, you've used it and had it on your team for a while now. Do you think it's unlocking new opportunities for your team? What do you think if you had to summarize the win for your team? You've talked about iteration and speed, talked about confidence. Are there any other sort of big wins that you as a team at Intuit are finding with this method?
Yeah, I would say it allows us to do more. That's the big win for me. It allows us to do more. And so usually you'd have a research question and you answer it. We as researchers, it's on us to like find additional questions that people aren't thinking about, right? Like they're not even thinking about these areas. Like, let's go find those out and we can answer those really quickly. And it's a surprise to our stakeholders. It's like
Yeah.
showing up with cookies. We show up with data to the meetings and like findings
Yeah.
that people weren't even thinking about, right? Like this
And to that point,
thing.
yeah, and to your point, your CEO, in fact, really clung
Yes.
to some of the insights. And I'm hoping if you might just in the last seconds we have here, walk us through that.
Yes. Yeah, we do have a lot of reviews with our board and our CEO for our products. And accuracy was surfaced as huge. And as a result, there was a whole team that was formed. We dug a lot deeper into where it needs to be accurate, what is accuracy for our particular workflows. And there was a whole engineering team that was formed to really hone in on accuracy. We created different measures and so forth. And so really unlocked the doors for us on the potential that AI could serve for our customers.
That's great. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Aaron and our CEO, Basil, at User Interviews, we've been talking a lot about finding small business owners. Joanne did that in part through User Interviews, which has a direct integration with Outset. So if you're someone who needs recruitment or wants to build a panel of your own customers, you can do that right from Outset. So, Aaron, anything to mention to that? Something about recruitment and how important it is to find real people to interact with AI moderation?
Well, this is a garbage in, garbage out business. I mean, you're only going to do your research is only as good as your recruitment and participants. And so we like our approach is to partner. I mean, their user interviews has already cracked this, right? This is what they do. And so I think from our standpoint, the better the people in, the better, the more AI can get, the deeper you can go, all of those things. So it's been an awesome partnership so far. It's been doing great. And yeah, nothing else to add.
Love it. And yeah, to reinforce, AI is augmenting user researchers, augmenting the work that we're doing, and it's making it easier for us to connect with and learn from our customers. And so that's why User Interviews is so committed and interested in partnering with tools like Outset and helping teams like Joanne's, because Joanne wants to hear from real small business owners about their real pain points and their real delights with QuickBooks and other products. And so I think we've got a match made in heaven. Joanne, Aaron, thank you so very much for sharing your experience, your impressions. We'll send more information about Outset and User Interviews for folks who want to learn more. Thank you so much for hanging with us, and hopefully we'll get to see each of you doing and sharing more about AI moderated research in the future. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Joanne.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, y'all. Take care.